What if I told you there's a country in Africa that, for over 1,500 years, kept a sacred book the rest of the Christian world decided to ditch? How would you feel knowing that while Europe was burning manuscripts and censoring knowledge, a kingdom in the mountains of Ethiopia zealously guarded the words of a prophet who walked with God and never saw death? This ain't some urban legend. This is documented history. And the story we're about to crack open today will completely reshape how you understand the Bible you grew up with. The Book of Enoch wasn't just some fringe text. For centuries, it was a cornerstone of Judeo-Christian tradition. The apostles knew it. Early church fathers quoted it. The communities who preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls copied it with devotion. It was considered sacred, prophetic, essential. And then, poof, it vanished. Not physically at first, but from the collective memory. Church councils decided this text didn't belong in the canon. Copies stopped being produced. References turned hostile. In a matter of centuries, Western Christianity forgot it ever existed. But way out in the rugged highlands of Ethiopia, something entirely different played out. A church geographically isolated with a tradition stretching back to Christianity's earliest centuries made a different call. For them, the Book of Enoch never stopped being sacred word. It was never questioned, never sidelined. While European libraries couldn't rustle up a single complete copy, Ethiopian monasteries were meticulously preserving the text in their sacred language, Ge'ez. While Western theologians argued about whether the book had really existed, Ethiopian priests were reading it in their liturgies. While the rest of the world forgot, Ethiopia remembered. This is the story of a forgotten truth, a cold case file from ancient history that defied all odds. A truth that talks about angels who descended from heaven, forbidden knowledge passed down to humanity, visions of the Messiah that are extraordinarily detailed, and the secrets of the cosmos revealed to a chosen man. Why did the West dump what Ethiopia held on to? What was in this book that made it so dangerous to some, yet so sacred to others? How could a perfectly legitimate Christian tradition roll with a completely different Bible than the one you grew up with? These questions don't have easy answers. They demand we dig into the history of how scriptures were formed, into the power dynamics that determined what was canonical and what wasn't, into the fascinating differences between Christian traditions that rarely get discussed. The journey we're about to take will drag you from the dusty caves of Qumran, where the oldest fragments of the text were found, to those rock-hewn monasteries tucked away in the Ethiopian mountains. From the councils where the fate of scriptures was decided to the astounding moment when European explorers rediscovered what their own civilization had lost. Look, we're not here to trash anyone's faith or stir up destructive doubt. We're here to explore a fascinating truth that deserves to be known, a truth that enriches, not impoverishes, our understanding of biblical tradition. The Book of Enoch is packed with revelations early Christians considered absolutely vital. Visions of the final judgment, descriptions of the Son of Man in glory, explanations about the origin of evil that complement and expand the Genesis account, astronomical knowledge that the ancients attributed to divine revelation. All of this survived thanks to a community of faith the world frequently ignores. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, with its unique traditions, its ancient practices, and its expanded biblical canon, kept this treasure for humanity. Today, that treasure is out there for anyone willing to dig. Translations exist. Academic studies abound. The knowledge that was hidden for centuries can be accessed by anyone with enough curiosity. The question is, got that kind of curiosity? Ready to unearth the forgotten truth of the Book of Enoch? Got the guts to explore what only Ethiopia kept on life support? Because what comes next isn't speculation or fantasy. It's documented history, textual evidence, living tradition. And it will forever change how you see the Bible and the formation of the sacred canon. So, come on, let's hit the road on this extraordinary trip. The Book of Enoch is waiting. To truly grasp how Ethiopia became the lone keeper of this sacred text, we first got to dive into the wild, extraordinary history of Ethiopian Christianity, one of the oldest and least known traditions on the planet. Christianity rolled into Ethiopia back in the 4th century, pretty much the same time it was becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire. According to tradition, it was Saint Frumentius who evangelized the kingdom of Axum, later consecrated as bishop by Athanasius of Alexandria. But Ethiopia's ties to biblical tradition go way, way further back. The Bible itself mentions Ethiopia repeatedly. The Book of Acts narrates the conversion of an Ethiopian eunuch, an official of Queen Candace, returning from worshipping in Jerusalem. Ethiopian traditions talk about even deeper connections, including that famous story of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This ancient pedigree gave the Ethiopian Church some serious independence. Although it maintained ties with the Patriarchate of Alexandria, its geographical isolation, protected by formidable mountains, allowed it to develop unique traditions. When theological debates were splitting the rest of Christianity, Ethiopia frequently followed its own path. The Ethiopian biblical canon is significantly beefier than the Western one. It includes not only the Book of Enoch, but also the Book of Jubilees, works that other Christian traditions rejected or ignored. For the Ethiopian Church, these weren't some dusty, throwaway apocryphal texts. They're sacred scripture, just as inspired as Genesis or the Gospels. Why did Ethiopia hold on to what others ditched? Several reasons converge. First off, isolation. Those Ethiopian mountains threw up a natural barrier against outside influences. The councils that defined the canon in other parts of the Christian world had no direct authority over Ethiopia. Decisions made in Nicaea, Constantinople, or Rome arrived filtered, if they arrived at all. Second, the sheer antiquity of their tradition. When Christianity hit Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch was still widely respected. The Ethiopian Church inherited a collection of sacred texts that predated the debates that would eventually exclude it elsewhere. Third, their deep connection to ancient Jewish traditions. Ethiopia maintained practices that other churches abandoned: circumcision, dietary laws, the observance of the Sabbath alongside Sunday. This orientation, closer to Christianity's original Jewish roots, favored the preservation of texts like Enoch, which had profoundly Jewish origins. The Book of Enoch we know today exists complete only in Ge'ez, the Ethiopian liturgical language. While Aramaic and Greek fragments have been discovered, no other tradition preserved the text in its entirety. Without Ethiopia, we'd only have scattered pieces of a work once revered throughout the Mediterranean world. The oldest Ethiopian manuscripts we've got our hands on date back to around the 15th century, but the translation into Ge'ez probably happened much earlier, possibly in the 4th or 5th century, when Christianity was establishing itself in the region. This means that for over 1,000 years, generations of Ethiopian scribes faithfully copied the text, preserving it for posterity. Ethiopian liturgical practice actually incorporates readings from the Book of Enoch. This ain't some text gathering dust in forgotten archives. It's a living word preached in churches, studied by priests, known by the faithful. This continuity of use guaranteed its survival in ways that simple storage in libraries never could. Ethiopian monasteries, some carved right into the rock of inaccessible mountains, basically functioned as knowledge fortresses. In places like Lalibela, with its famous rock-hewn churches, or on the islands of Lake Tana, sacred manuscripts were preserved through centuries of invasions, wars, and political shifts. If this deep dive into the Book of Enoch and the extraordinary Ethiopian tradition is already messing with what you thought you knew, just imagine what else is out there to uncover. This channel exists to explore the forgotten truths of religious history, to honor traditions the world has ignored, to seek genuine knowledge about sacred scriptures. Join this community of explorers by hitting that subscribe button. We don't promise easy answers, but we do promise an honest journey into truths that deserve to be known. Now let's keep digging deeper into why this text was preserved in one place and rejected in others. The actual content of the Book of Enoch explains both its original pull and why the West eventually gave it the boot. What this text reveals challenges fundamental assumptions and dramatically expands the biblical narrative we know. The section known as the Book of the Watchers drops a radical expansion of that brief, mysterious passage in Genesis chapter 6, where it mentions the sons of God taking wives from the daughters of men. Where the canonical Bible gives us just a few enigmatic verses, Enoch blows it wide open with a complete and seriously unsettling narrative. According to the Ethiopian text, they held on to 200 celestial angels called Watchers because their job was to observe and protect, came down hard on Mount Hermon. They made a mutual pact, swearing to each other they'd complete their transgression. They took human wives and fathered giants who brought destruction to the earth. But the real game changer isn't just this story of cosmic sexual transgression. It's the knowledge these angels passed down. The text specifically details what they taught: metallurgy for making weapons of war, cosmetics and beautification techniques, astrology, and reading the heavens. enchantments and root cutting, knowledge of plants and their properties. This narrative throws out an alternative explanation for the origin of evil and the rapid advance of human tech. It wasn't simply disobedience in Eden that corrupted humanity. It was also the premature transmission of celestial knowledge. Technology, magical arts, even cosmetics, according to Enoch, have a fallen angelic origin. The theological implications? Massive. If knowledge itself can be dangerous, if there are things humans shouldn't know, then controlling information becomes a spiritual matter. It's not hard to see why later religious authorities might find this problematic or convenient, depending on their perspective. The celestial journey sections describe Enoch getting whisked away through the different heavens. He sees the prisons where the transgressive angels await eternal judgment. He contemplates the storehouses of the winds, the snows, the rains. He observes the movements of the sun and moon through heavenly gates. The astronomical knowledge in the Book of Enoch is pretty mind-blowing in its detail. The text presents a solar calendar of 364 days, divided into 4 perfectly equal seasons of 91 days each. This calendar differs from the lunar one that later dominated Rabbinic Judaism, and some specialists propose that real calendar conflicts are reflected in these textual differences. The Parables of Enoch, a particularly heavy section, roll out the figure of the Son of Man with clearly messianic characteristics. This being pre-exists creation. He was chosen and hidden in the presence of the Lord of Spirits before the sun and stars were formed. He will sit on a throne of glory to judge kings and the powerful. The connection to descriptions of Jesus in the Gospels? Undeniable. When Jesus used the title Son of Man, his first-century Jewish listeners probably had these Enochic traditions in mind. The title wasn't a humble expression, but a claim of extraordinary cosmic identity. The text also packs in dramatically detailed prophecies about the final judgment. The rich who oppressed the poor will be stripped bare. The kings who abused their power will be humbled. The righteous who suffered will be vindicated. This message of eschatological reversal had revolutionary social implications. When Christianity became the religion of the empire, when bishops were whispering in emperors' ears and the church was raking in wealth and power, was a text promising divine judgment against the powerful of the earth really all that convenient? You do the math. Ethiopia, cut off from those Western power plays, didn't have the same reasons to suppress the text. Its church never became an imperial institution in the Roman or Byzantine style. Its kings were devout, but the relationship between secular and ecclesiastical power took different forms. To really get a grip on the importance of the Book of Enoch preserved by Ethiopia, we need to break down some fundamental concepts that often get twisted or just plain ignored. The first crucial concept is biblical canon. A lot of folks just assume the Bible has always been exactly as it is now, that its boundaries were obvious from day one. The historical reality? Way different. The canon formed gradually over centuries, and different Christian communities came to different conclusions about which books to include. The Ethiopian Church rolls with an 81-book canon, significantly bigger than the 66 in Protestantism or the 73 in Catholicism. This doesn't represent some late addition of dubious texts. It represents the preservation of an older tradition, one that existed before the exclusion processes other churches experienced. Grasping this flips your whole perspective. The question isn't why Ethiopia added books, but why other traditions ditched them. The Book of Enoch wasn't invented by the Ethiopians. It was inherited from the early church and simply never removed. The second crucial concept is Ge'ez as a sacred language. Ge'ez stopped being a spoken language centuries ago, but it remains the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Church, similar to Latin in traditional Catholicism or Church Slavonic in Russian Orthodoxy. This linguistic preservation had massive consequences for the Book of Enoch's survival. Texts in Ge'ez were copied and recopied by dedicated monks through the centuries. The sacredness of the language protected the manuscripts from casual alterations. What got preserved isn't some modern translation, but a textual transmission of remarkable antiquity. The third concept worth chewing on is that of a living tradition versus a dead text. Out west, the Book of Enoch became an academic curiosity once it was rediscovered. In Ethiopia, it never stopped being functional scripture, read in liturgies, studied in seminaries, known by the faithful. This difference is significant. A text that lives in a community of faith experiences a different type of preservation than one that's simply stored in libraries. The community develops interpretations, resolves ambiguities, maintains reading contexts. By the time European scholars finally got their hands on the Book of Enoch, Ethiopian priests had been interpreting it for centuries. The fourth key concept is the relationship between early Judaism and Christianity that the Book of Enoch throws a spotlight on. The Ethiopian Church maintains practices that other Christian traditions abandoned early on: circumcision, dietary distinctions, observance of the Sabbath in addition to Sunday. These practices reflect a Christianity way closer to its Jewish roots, a Christianity that never went through the radical break with Judaism that characterized the faith's Western development. The Book of Enoch, deeply Jewish in its origin, fit naturally into this tradition. The Aramaic fragments of Enoch found at Qumran prove the text was central to Jewish communities during the Second Temple period. The Ethiopian preservation continued this veneration, while Rabbinic Judaism and Western Christianity eventually marginalized it for different reasons. We've just cracked open how fundamental concepts like the biblical canon, sacred language, and living tradition explain the unique preservation of the Book of Enoch in Ethiopia. But I gotta ask, which of these revelations blew your mind the most? Did you even know there were Bibles out there with more books than the one you're familiar with? Ever heard of Ethiopia's wild Christian tradition? Drop a comment below. I dig reading your thoughts. And who knows, maybe your comment will spark the next topic we dig into together. Now let's keep digging deeper into this fascinating story. To fully appreciate the how and why of Ethiopia holding on to the Book of Enoch, we gotta plunge into the extraordinary context of this unique civilization. Ethiopia ain't just another African country. It's one of the oldest civilizations on the planet, with a documented history stretching back over 3,000 years. The Kingdom of Aksum, precursor to the modern Ethiopian state, was one of the great powers of the ancient world, rivaling Rome and Persia in commercial influence. Ethiopian traditions lay claim to a direct link with biblical Israel through that famous story of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to the Kebra Nagast, the Book of the Glory of Kings, the Ethiopian national text, the queen visited Solomon in Jerusalem and conceived a son, Menelik I, who would later found Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty. Even wilder, tradition asserts that Menelik brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, where, believers swear, it remains to this day, tucked away in a special chapel in Aksum. Although scholars debate the historicity of these claims, their importance to Ethiopian identity is undeniable. This claimed connection to Israel sheds a lot of light on Ethiopian religiosity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church doesn't see itself as some derivative or secondary tradition. It considers itself a direct heir to divine promises, connected to sacred history from its most remote origins. The Christianity that hit Ethiopia in the 4th century found fertile ground in a culture already revering Israelite traditions. Conversion wasn't a break, but a continuation. The Ethiopians already knew the God of Abraham. Now they accepted his Messiah. This continuity explains why they held on to texts and practices other Christian traditions just dumped. Circumcision on the 8th day, dietary restrictions similar to Jewish kashrut, the centrality of the Ark in devotion. All of this reflects a Christianity that never completely broke with its Old Testament roots. The Book of Enoch fit right in with this tradition. Its protagonist was an antediluvian patriarch, predating Abraham, connected to the most primordial origins of sacred history. His revelations about the heavens, angels, and judgment complemented the biblical narrative in ways the Ethiopians found natural and edifying. The geography, too, played a massive role. Yeah, that played its part. The mountains of Ethiopia, some topping out at over 13,000 feet, created a natural isolation, a geographical stronghold. The invasions that devastated other Christian regions, from the Islamic conquests to the Crusades, they hit Ethiopia differently. The country held on to its Christian independence for centuries while other kingdoms just crumbled. This isolation had direct textual consequences, like a paper trail gone cold. The theological brawls that defined orthodoxy in Constantinople or Rome. They reached Ethiopia filtered, diluted, and late. Decisions about what books were canonical and which ones got the boot simply didn't carry the same binding authority. Ethiopia could keep its received tradition without outside pressure to fall in line. Ethiopian monasteries, tucked away in God-forsaken corners, developed an extraordinary manuscript preservation racket. Communities of monks dedicated their lives to grinding out copies of sacred texts. This scribal tradition kept these invaluable pieces from vanishing into the ether. The aesthetic of Ethiopian manuscripts. It's got a unique, unmistakable fingerprint. Goatskin parchment, distinctive Ge'ez script, colorful illustrations following their own conventions. These weren't just books you'd toss on a nightstand. They were holy relics, handled with the kind of reverence you see for a priceless artifact. When European explorers finally busted through to Ethiopia in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found a Christian world that hit them like a cold shower. Stuff that looked Jewish, texts they thought were long gone, liturgies that made no sense. The Book of Enoch was right there, front and center, in that jaw-dropping discovery. You could tell the story of the Book of Enoch like a series of fork-in-the-road moments, paths diverging, traditions splitting off, textual destinies twisting apart. Back in the early days of Christianity, the Book of Enoch was a big deal, widely known and respected. The Qumran fragments? They scream its importance in Second Temple Jewish communities. Judas, in his epistle, drops a direct quote, showing the early Christians saw it as straight-up prophecy. Church fathers in the 2nd and 3rd centuries quoted it left and right. Tertullian went to bat for it. Irenaeus and Clement of Alexandria gave it the nod. No clear lines drawn then between who'd keep it and who'd ditch it. The real turning point? The 4th century, when Christianity went corporate. Constantine made it legal. His successors made it the official state religion. And suddenly, they needed to nail down what was orthodox. What books were the real deal? What got read in church? What got tossed in the trash? The councils that hashed this out? They left the Book of Enoch out of the new canon. Plenty of reasons. Its wild cosmology, its ties to groups they called heretics, and its whole direct revelation thing that really gummed up the works for church authority. Bit by bit, the text got pushed to the side in the West. But in Ethiopia, that whole process just didn't happen. Ethiopian Christianity was already set up shop before those Western councils even started drawing lines. The Ethiopian church wasn't at those meetings, and they sure as hell weren't bound by what got decided there. Through the medieval centuries, those paths split hard. In Europe, copies of the Book of Enoch vanished. References turned hostile or just plain murky. The text became a whisper, a ghost story, something that supposedly existed but nobody could actually lay eyes on. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, that book was still being copied, read, studied. Generations of monks in those remote monasteries kept that text alive, with the same fidelity they gave the Gospels. To them, no difference. All of it was sacred scripture. The West's rediscovery kicked off in the 18th century. A Scottish explorer, James Bruce, after years of trekking through Ethiopia, brought several Ge'ez manuscripts of the Book of Enoch back to Europe. For the first time in over 1,000 years, Western scholars could actually read the whole damn thing. The impact? Huge. Academics immediately saw its game-changing importance for understanding intertestamental Judaism and the very roots of Christianity. Translations popped up everywhere. The Book of Enoch went from whispered legend to accessible document. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovery in 1947 provided the dramatic confirmation. The Aramaic and Hebrew fragments found in those Qumran caves proved the Ethiopian text wasn't some medieval hoax. It was a faithful translation of a genuinely ancient original. Today, the Book of Enoch holds a unique spot. It's not canonical for most Christian churches, but it's recognized as an invaluable historical document. For Ethiopian Christians, it's still sacred scripture. For academics, an essential source. For spiritual seekers, a fascinating text. The irony? It's a kicker. A book the West pretty much jettisoned was kept alive by a tradition the West often overlooks. The knowledge survived right where you'd least expect it. In the highlands of an African nation, the Western Christian world rarely gives a second thought. The story of the Book of Enoch isn't just about preservation, it's about transformation. Understanding how the text got tweaked, interpreted, and sometimes plain twisted helps us truly appreciate what Ethiopia held on to. First layer of transformation, linguistic. The Book of Enoch was originally penned in Aramaic, maybe some Hebrew sections. Then it got translated into Greek at some point. From Greek it went to Ethiopian Ge'ez. Every single translation meant interpretative calls that bent the meaning. Those Aramaic fragments from Qumran, they let us, in some cases, square the Ethiopian version against the original. Differences are usually minor, a testament to how faithful the text got passed down. But yeah, there are variants, and the eggheads are still duking it out over them. Second layer, editorial. The Book of Enoch we've got isn't one solid piece. It's a mashup of different writings from different eras. The astronomical book might be the oldest. The parables might be the freshest. Who decided to stitch them together? Were there other parts that just didn't make it? Evidence points to this compilation already being pretty much in its current form when it got translated to Greek, then Gez. The Ethiopians inherited an anthology already assembled. But how it all came together? Still a bit of a black box. Third layer, interpretive. Every community that picked up the Book of Enoch read it through their own lens, based on their own worries and worlds. Second Temple Jews read it one way, early Christians another, Gnostics yet another. The Ethiopians, they cooked up their own interpretive traditions over centuries. When the West finally stumbled back across the text, those interpretive layers just exploded. Early European translators came with their own baggage. 19th century academics read it through evolutionary or comparative lenses. Theologians, they judged it by their own church doctrines. Today, new distortions are cropping up. In certain popular circles, the Book of Enoch gets peddled as the book the church doesn't want you to read, like it's spilling some deep, dark conspiracy secrets. The Watchers? They're aliens, forbidden knowledge, lost advanced tech. These modern takes, understandable given the text's dramatic language, completely miss the original context. The ancient authors and readers weren't thinking UFOs or Atlantis. They were thinking cosmic sin, divine judgment, and how to explain evil in the world. Another kind of distortion comes from cherry-picking religious appropriation. Some groups quote the Book of Enoch when it fits their agenda, but conveniently ignore the parts that mess with their positions. The text becomes a quarry for out-of-context sound bites instead of being read as a coherent work with its own internal logic. The Ethiopian tradition offers a damn valuable corrective. For over 15 centuries, the Ethiopian Church has read the Book of Enoch as sacred scripture, developing consistent, contextualized interpretations. That accumulated wisdom deserves respect and attention, even if Westerners rarely bother to look it up. Getting back to the text's original meaning takes humility and serious legwork. We've got to admit we're late to the party, separated by millennia from when this stuff was written. The communities that kept this text alive, they've got insights a newbie academic wouldn't even dream of. We also need to separate the text itself from the interpretations piled on top of it. The Book of Enoch is an ancient document with its own integrity. Modern readings, academic, devotional, or sensationalist, are just add-ons. Don't confuse them with the original. Ethiopian preservation offers us the most complete and best transmitted text. But even this text is a translation of a translation, a compilation whose full genesis we don't completely grasp. Humility in the face of these limitations? It's not just appropriate, it's essential. The evidence backing the authenticity and antiquity of the Book of Enoch, as preserved by Ethiopia, is substantial and comes from multiple angles. The heaviest hitter? The Dead Sea Scrolls. Among the thousands of fragments unearthed in those caves near Qumran, numerous Aramaic manuscripts of the Book of Enoch were identified. These fragments date from roughly the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE. Their existence proves the Book of Enoch was making the rounds in Jewish communities centuries before Christianity even hit the scene. Significantly, the Qumran fragments match all sections of the Book of Enoch except the parables. That absence has sparked debate. Some eggheads propose the parables were a later addition, maybe even contemporary with early Christianity. Others argue it could be pure coincidence or just reflected the Qumran community's particular tastes. Comparing the Aramaic fragments and the Ethiopian version shows a remarkably faithful textual transmission. Differences are minor, consistent with the kind of variations you'd expect in any manuscript tradition. The Ethiopian version genuinely preserved the ancient text. They didn't invent it or monkey with it much. Second line of evidence? The New Testament itself. The Epistle of Jude, verses 14 and 15, quotes the Book of Enoch directly, treating it as bona fide prophecy. That quote proves the text was known and respected by early Christians. Beyond that explicit quote, specialists have pinpointed numerous allusions to the Book of Enoch in other New Testament texts. The Son of Man language in the Gospels, references to fallen angels in 2 Peter, elements of the heavenly vision in Revelation, all show Enochic influence. Third piece of evidence, patristic writings. The church fathers of the early centuries quoted and debated the Book of Enoch extensively. Tertullian championed it. Irenaeus cited it. Clement of Alexandria used it. These references demonstrate the text's wide circulation and the respect it commanded before it got sidelined. Jerome, the guy who translated the Latin Vulgate, even though he rejected the book, still testified to its existence and its widespread knowledge in his day. Even the rejections are proof the text was known and discussed. Fourth line of evidence, the Ethiopian manuscript tradition itself. The oldest Ge'ez manuscripts we've got date back to the 15th century, but the translation probably happened over 1,000 years before that. The consistency across manuscripts from different centuries and regions shows careful, controlled transmission. The Ethiopian Church developed meticulous scribal practices. Monks copying sacred texts did it as an act of devotion, with reverence and close attention. Errors were corrected, variants identified, textual integrity protected. Finally, the internal evidence of the text itself screams its antiquity. The language, the theological concepts, the concerns reflected. It all lines up with the Second Temple Jewish period. The Book of Enoch doesn't read like some medieval fabrication. It reads like a product of its real historical era. Areas of uncertainty? Yeah, they stick around. We don't know the original authors. The exact circumstances of each section's composition are debated. How different writings got bundled into the collection we know. Still not entirely clear. So we've walked through some fascinating evidence about the Book of Enoch and its preservation in Ethiopia. But now I gotta ask, where are you tuning in from? What state, what city, are you joining us from on this hunt for knowledge about these forgotten texts of biblical tradition? Drop your location in the comments. It's wild to see folks from all over the map digging for the same answers about the mysteries of ancient scripture. And now, let's move on to one of the most revealing chapters of this whole twisted tale. To really get why the Book of Enoch survived in Ethiopia but got iced out in the West, you gotta look at the power plays that were going down in different arenas. Western Christianity went through a radical transformation in the 4th century. From a persecuted cult, it became the imperial faith. Roman emperors, starting with Constantine, got their hands dirty directly in church affairs. Doctrinal unity? That became a state interest. In that kind of climate, defining the biblical canon wasn't just some theological hair-splitting. It was pure politics. An empire needed a unified religion with clearly defined texts. The grab bag of scriptures that characterized early Christianity, that became a problem. The councils that hammered out the canon operated under these pressures. These weren't gatherings of disinterested saints just chasing divine truth. They were political slugfests, too, where different factions vied for influence, where imperial will threw its weight around, where practical considerations bent decisions. The Book of Enoch threw a few wrenches into this unification project. Its wild cosmology didn't slot easily into the frameworks they were trying to standardize. Its model of direct revelation undercut the emerging church authority. Its ties to groups branded as heretical, that tainted it by association. 4th century bishops were building institutions that are still standing today. Episcopal authority, apostolic succession, the church's teaching office, it all demanded that revelation flow through official channels. A text showing an antediluvian patriarch getting heavenly secrets without institutional middlemen. That threatened the whole monopoly. The social critiques baked into the Book of Enoch were also problematic. Its denunciations against the rich and powerful. Its promises that kings and princes would be humbled in judgment. That hit uncomfortably close to home when the church was buddying up with imperial power. Ethiopia? It saw very different dynamics. Its church never became an imperial institution, Roman style. The relationship between religious and secular power took different forms. Ethiopian emperors were devout, but the church kept a good chunk of independence. Geographic isolation meant decisions made in faraway councils had no real teeth. Ethiopia wasn't taking orders from Constantinople or Rome on what books to put in its Bible. It could hold on to its inherited tradition without pressure to conform. Ethiopia's church structure was also different. Monasteries played a central role, and these monasteries were often in remote spots, far from any power centers. Manuscript preservation hinged on monastic communities that valued their own particular tradition. It's important not to oversimplify. There wasn't some centralized conspiracy to deep-six the Book of Enoch. The process was gradual, the result of many individual decisions made in different contexts. Some church leaders genuinely believed they were protecting the faith by sidelining texts they saw as problematic. Nor should we romanticize the Ethiopian tradition as if it were free of its own power dynamics. The Ethiopian Church has its own history of internal conflicts, imposed orthodoxies, favored texts, and those pushed to the margins. No human institution is immune to these realities. What we can say for sure is that Ethiopia's particular historical circumstances allowed for the preservation of a text that other contexts tossed aside. The interests that led to the Book of Enoch's exclusion in the West simply didn't play out the same way in the Ethiopian highlands. The broader lesson? The formation of the biblical canon was a human process, stamped by the circumstances of its time. That doesn't mean the resulting canon is illegitimate. It means we've got to understand it in context, recognizing that other possibilities existed and that valuable texts got left out in some traditions while thriving in others. Let's dive straight into the content of the Book of Enoch, just as the Ethiopian tradition preserved it, based on the primary sources we've got. The text kicks off with solemn words, laying out its prophetic nature. Enoch is introduced as a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God, who saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens shown to him by angels. What follows are revelations meant not for his own generation, but for generations down the line. The Book of the Watchers tells the story of the celestial angels' transgression. The text names the leaders of the 200 who came down, Semyaza, who led them, Azazel, who taught the forbidden arts, and others whose names echo ancient angelological traditions. The description of the knowledge passed down is specific. The sources preserve that Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, and showed them metals and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of precious stones and dyes. Other angels taught enchantments and the cutting of roots. Others revealed the stars, others the course of the moon. The knowledge thus transmitted covered everything from technology to magic, astronomy to the occult. Enoch's celestial journeys describe his treks through different cosmic regions, guided by angels. He sees the place where the heavens are completed. He beholds the storehouses of all the winds. He observes the cornerstone of the earth, and the four winds that hold up the earth, and the firmament of the sky. The geographical descriptions mix the recognizable with the mythical: mountains of fire, rivers of fire emptying into the great western sea, 7 mountains of precious stones. The tree of life. The parables lay out visions of judgment and the chosen one, or Son of Man. The texts describe this being in extraordinary terms: a head white as wool, and beside him another whose face carried the grace of a holy angel with the semblance of a man. This Son of Man, it claims, existed before the sun and the signs, before the stars were flung into the cosmos. His name was spoken before the Lord of Spirits prior to creation itself. He's pegged as the light for the Gentiles and a beacon of hope for those suffering. The described judgment? It's intense. Kings and the powerful will be handed over to angels for their comeuppance. They'll beg for mercy, but it won't be found. The righteous, those who were crushed, will be lifted up. The eschatological reversals are total. No takebacks. The astronomical book lays out the solar calendar and celestial movements with remarkable detail. It maps the gates where the sun rises and sets, the ebb and flow of days and nights, the changing seasons. That 364-day calendar, it's presented as a divine revelation of cosmic order. Enoch's epistle packs exhortations for the righteous and stark warnings for sinners. Its promises offer comfort to the faithful. Don't sweat it, righteous souls, because angels are keeping tabs on your suffering. Your hope ain't gonna be in vain. Your cries will be heard. The warnings for the wicked, brutal. Woe to you who feast on the sweat of the righteous. Woe to you who drink from every well. Your riches will be stripped away. Your good times will flip into torment. Academic consensus pegs the Book of Enoch as an invaluable document for understanding Second Temple Judaism. Research keeps peeling back its connections to the New Testament, to apocalyptic literature, and to the messianic hopes of that era. After sifting through the evidence on the Book of Enoch and its wild preservation in Ethiopia, the million-dollar question hits you. How do we square this knowledge with our understanding of faith and history? First up, we got to reconcile the various Christian traditions. The Ethiopian Church holding the Book of Enoch as sacred scripture, while other traditions don't. That's a real diversity we need to own up to, not try to patch up with some artificial fix. Christianity was never some monolithic block. Right from the get-go, different communities had different practices, different hang-ups, different collections of sacred texts. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is a legit ancient tradition, carrying the torch from the faith's earliest centuries. Their take deserves respect, not some patronizing pat on the head. For those whose traditions don't count Enoch as canonical, it doesn't mean you gotta adopt it as scripture, but it does mean acknowledging that fellow believers have revered it for centuries. A little humility in the face of that diversity? Totally appropriate. Second reconciliation, faith versus historical knowledge. Some folks get their hackles up when they find out the biblical canon was shaped by historical processes, that there were debates, other possibilities on the table. They worry it'll gut the scripture's authority. But that tension? Totally unnecessary. Acknowledging God worked through human processes doesn't negate divine providence. Inspiration can absolutely operate through councils, decisions, community traditions. Human history and divine action aren't mutually exclusive, not by a long shot. What this recognition does do is call us to humility. If the canon decisions were human, they're subject to human limitations. We can be grateful for the canon we've got while still admitting valuable texts got left out in some traditions. Third up, the ancient text and modern appropriations. The Book of Enoch has been twisted to prop up ancient astronaut theories, ecclesiastical conspiracies. New Age takes on spirituality. These readings, popular as they might be, often totally warp the original meaning. To reclaim the Book of Enoch, you gotta read it in its own context. This was Jewish religious literature from the intertestamental period. Its authors and readers believed in angels, divine judgment, prophetic revelation. They weren't thinking about aliens or lost tech. Doesn't mean the text lacks contemporary punch, though. Its themes of justice, hope amidst suffering, cosmic responsibility. They hit on perennial concerns, but we gotta distinguish between what the text says and what we want it to say. Fourth point, spiritual curiosity versus community engagement. The Book of Enoch fascinates a lot of independent seekers who dive into it outside established traditions. That solo quest? It's legit, but it's got its limits. The communities that have preserved and pored over this text for centuries, they've got insights a lone reader just can't get. The Ethiopian tradition of interpretation, built up over 1,500 years, offers perspectives no modern individual could conjure up on their own. Doesn't mean we gotta convert to Ethiopian Christianity to read Enoch legitimately, but it does mean taking seriously the voices of those who've lived with this text for generations. Humility toward tradition complements, it doesn't contradict, personal pursuit. Fifth, and finally, the lost and the preserved. The Book of Enoch reminds us that Christianity is way broader than we often imagine. There were revered texts that got sidelined, vibrant traditions that got forgotten, voices that got silenced. That loss is real, and it's a damn shame. But there was also preservation. Ethiopia held on to what others let go. The manuscripts survived. The knowledge didn't vanish completely. What was lost can, at least partially, be brought back. The Book of Enoch stands as a testament to this possibility of recovery. A text almost scrubbed from Western memory is now out there for anyone who wants to read it. Secrets kept under wraps for centuries can now be known. The forgotten truth can be remembered. We've taken quite a trip together, spanning time and space. From the Second Temple Jewish communities all the way to those monasteries tucked away in the Ethiopian mountains. From the councils that hammered out the canon to that jaw-dropping moment when the Western world stumbled onto what it had lost. The Book of Enoch isn't just some old text for archaeology buffs. It's a living testament to a spiritual tradition the world often just blows off. It's proof that Christianity is more diverse, older, and way richer than most folks ever figure. What Ethiopia preserved wasn't just a dusty old manuscript. It was a cosmic vision, an understanding of the roots of evil, a hope in divine judgment, a link to revelations early believers held sacred. For over 15 centuries, while the West was busy forgetting, Ethiopian monks in those carved stone monasteries faithfully copied Enoch's words. Generation after generation, the visions of fallen angels, the sky-high journeys, the prophecies of the Son of Man, They just kept getting passed down. This wasn't some accident. This was an act of faith. The Ethiopians believed they were guarding sacred words, and they acted on it. Their devotion saved a treasure for humanity that otherwise would have been gone for good. The historical irony here is deep, man. The Western Christian world, which saw itself as the center of civilization, dropped the ball on a text that a tradition often sidelined as African or peripheral kept alive. Those who thought they were the main heirs to the faith ended up with an incomplete inheritance. But this ain't a story of shame. It's one of gratitude. Thanks to Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch is out there today. Thanks to devoted monks in remote spots, the knowledge survived. Thanks to a tradition the world blew off, we can tap into revelations that would otherwise just be whispers. The journey we took today has laid bare some truths worth knowing, like how the biblical canon was shaped by historical processes, how different legitimate Christian traditions rock different scriptures, how texts revered by apostles and early believers eventually got pushed to the side. These truths don't blow up faith, they deepen it, because they show that the spiritual quest has always been complex, that diversity has been a constant, that divine truth can survive in the unlikeliest of places. The Book of Enoch is waiting for you. Its pages hold visions early Christians were hip to. Its revelations about angels, the Messiah, judgment. They beef up and expand what the canonical Bible teaches. Its cosmology throws open windows to worlds that would otherwise stay locked tight. If you've made it this far, you're one of those folks who ain't afraid to ask the tough questions, who value knowledge as much as tradition, who get that questioning can deepen, not destroy, authentic faith. So, we've hit the end of this wild ride into the forgotten truth of the Book of Enoch and how Ethiopia kept it alive against all odds. If you've stuck with it this long, it's because you're one of those folks who chase genuine knowledge, who respect diverse traditions, who understand that spiritual truth can tough it out in unexpected places. This channel exists for people just like you. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, now's the perfect time. We've got a ton more to dig into together. Lost texts, forgotten traditions, the mysteries of religious history. Your company on this journey, it means everything. Ring that bell so you don't miss a single video. And right about now, another video should be popping up on your screen, ready to keep expanding your perspective on the secrets of ancient scriptures. Don't stop here. The chase for truth never ends. Ethiopia guarded the truth when others let it slide. Monks kept alive what councils tossed aside. The knowledge survived when all seemed lost. And now, that truth is all yours. The Book of Enoch has waited patiently for centuries. Its moment has arrived. And you, by completing this journey, you've become an heir to knowledge that almost vanished for good. Honor that legacy, share what you learned, and never stop chasing the truth, wherever it may lead.